I generally give all students the same assessment, but I do put some differentiation in the assessments. So, especially for math, some of the questions are a little more simple and or they have parts to them. So, some of them are easier and then they get more difficult. So, it's if you're familiar with an elementary rubric where they have the 1 to 4 scale, one being the your beginning level and four being your excelling. I kind of have questions like that, so the students who are at the beginning level should be able to attain the beginning level questions, and the students who are exceeding or excelling should be able to show that based on the work that they're doing in each question. So, and I have one class right now. Actually, it's two classes, but I'm teaching the same class twice every day. And I have some students who are at probably a grade 3, 4 level of math, and it's a grade 10 level class. And some of the students should probably be in like Foundations 20, which is a grade 11 level of math. So I have a very huge range of abilities, and so a lot of the times, like I said, I'll put some really easy questions that any student should be able to get even if they're at an elementary level. But then I'll also throw in some bonus questions. So for the students who are more excelling and could use the challenge, I put some bonus questions that they can attempt. I do, yes. I created a rubric with another teacher. She had kind of started it, and I had a similar rubric when I was teaching elementary, and then we kind of combined our two rubrics and made one. So I do a 1 to 4 scale, and then I have like 0.5s, 0.25s that I take things off. Like if in math, if you forget a negative sign, or if you forget to round your number, or you forget to write it was 5 centimeters instead of 5 inches, or stuff like that. There's little partial marks that can come off, but it's still kind of the same idea of like if you have a 1, it means you're beginning to understand. If you have a 2, you probably understood about half of what was going on. 3, you're proficient, you have a pretty good idea. And then 4 would be like you got it all right, you know what you're doing, you have everything in order, etc. I would give them a different assessment. I've had a few students who skipped an exam because they wanted to have their friends write it first and then tell them what was on it. So I created a more difficult exam then that they had to write on the same topic because they kind of had a heads up and an advantage, that the other students didn't have. Um, what else would I make a different assessment? That's usually kind of the only reason I would make a different assessment because, like I said, I kind of put differentiation in my assessments, and um, I allow my students to rewrite not unit exams, like not big exams, but little kind of like we learned how to add and subtract integers, for example. And I would give them kind of a little open book quiz on that just to see where they're at. And if they get 100%, great, you know what you're doing. If they get 50% or 70, whatever, I say correct your mistakes, learn from your mistakes, and correct them and hand it in again and show me if you have improved your learning or not. So they get the same assessment. It's the same one they started with, but they have a chance to show that they've actually increased their knowledge or not. But I do have a stipulation. They have to have done, if I gave them any practice questions, they have to have completed all the practice questions before I will remark their little open book test. Because otherwise, I was finding that a lot of students would rewrite the test, but they hadn't actually learned anymore. And so it was kind of just a waste of my time to keep correcting something that had no changes to it. So I require that they have done the practice to increase their knowledge before I'll, relook at their test. So it saves everybody a little bit of time. Saves me time, doesn't save them time. I have, yes. There have been a few times, like especially when I was starting to teach a subject and I hadn't taught it a lot before, and I would give an assessment, and then I'd be like, that was kind of a tough question, or that wasn't worded well, or whatever. So sometimes I would either give them a new assessment that was more, I don't know what the word would be, that would be better, better suited to them. Or I would give it back to them and say, everybody did this wrong and it was my fault, it wasn't your fault. So let's redo this question in particular, or something like that. I do a lot of marking, like writing on their papers and saying, okay, don't forget this, don't forget this rule. And that was I taught French in elementary school. So even like French grammar rules or French vocabulary, it was very similar to, math rules. Don't forget this rule here, don't forget that rule there. Often, especially on the open book tests, I'll just circle it. I won't tell them exactly what they did wrong because I am allowing them to try the question again. But I will maybe give them a little hint, like I said, oh, look, you had a negative here and it didn't show up again. So, I'll kind of draw an arrow or something just to kind of give them a hint. So most of my feedback is kind of more hints to help them figure out where they went wrong without just giving them the answer, so that they can think about, what can I do to fix this? And that's most of my feedback. I do a lot of, as I'm teaching, I do a lot of asking students questions and getting their thoughts. And so as they're giving me their thoughts, I'll be like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Or, okay, I understand where you're going. Now let's think about it this way, or something like that. So I give feedback as they're talking to me as well. And I try to, like, even if they give me an outrageous answer that's completely wrong, I always try to make sure that I'm like, oh, okay, I see how you might have thought that. Or I'll say, okay, how did you come to that conclusion? And get them to kind of explain themselves. And then I'll be like, okay, now based on what you've told me, let's think about da 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 da. So I kind of help them reason through out loud as well. And then other students also join in often to add in thoughts as they realize how to fix the mistake or whatever. I do a lot of, like what I just said, a lot of asking students questions, and sometimes it'll just be voluntary. Like if you put your hand up, then I'll ask you. But sometimes I'll say, okay, I'm going to go up and down the roads, and so you get ready because you're going to have a question to answer. Because a lot of kids, especially in math, have anxiety around math, and they don't want to be asked in front of this class about anything. So I kind of try to let them know, like, yeah, you're going to get a question, so be prepared. And so I find they pay a little more attention too when they know they're going to have to answer a question. I've been starting this year, the thinking classrooms. I don't know if you've heard of building thinking classrooms, and I've been having fun with that. We started it in the fall. I had an intern and she had learned a lot about it. So between the two of us, we came up with some good ideas in here. And so it gives you very immediate feedback on what the students know or don't know, because you can see it right in front of you as they're doing it. And you can kind of, I guess there's another place where I get feedback. I'll be like, oh, right here, something's not quite right. What could you do to fix that? Or I see the people beside you have a different answer than you. Who do you think is right? Like, who did it correctly, and who, or are you both right? And there's just different ways to do it, you know? So it's kind of cool to see their thinking process in progress and working together and coming up with solutions together. But that's mostly what I do. It's mostly like, as I'm teaching them something, I'm discussing with them, okay, what would I do next? What would be the next step? How would I do this? What would you guys do next? That kind of thing. So I can kind of gauge, I kind of almost always know who understands, who's following along, who is understanding as I'm doing that. Because the ones that sit there with the, you know, blank face or the big eyeballs, they're like, oof, I don't get it. And then the ones who are kind of like, oh yeah, this is easy. This is the answer. This is the answer. You know, it's very, very easy to tell who's getting it and who's not getting it before you even give them a test. I know a lot of teachers are much more strict than I am. Like, you get, a lot of teachers would never allow you to redo a test, for example. It's kind of like whatever you get is what you get. Whereas I'm assessing for mastery, I guess would be a good way to say it. I'm assessing to see if you can master this. And maybe you didn't get it at first, but maybe you get it a little bit later on. So I would like your mark to reflect the learning that you have achieved, not just the learning you knew at that exact moment when I first tested you. So I know a lot of teachers are, especially as you get into high school and get into the higher grades, they're a lot more stringent with their assessments. You know, like, there's no retakes or there's no extra time given. But for the most part, if a student has some kind of an ROA, a record of adaptations, or what, you know, they have some kind of special case, then usually I think most teachers are expected to make adaptations. But yeah, I've heard a lot of stories from because I have 5 children who, one is graduated, but I have the other 4 still in school. So I do hear stories from them about, like, oh, my teacher said this to this person or wouldn't let me do this or whatever. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay. Seems some people are a little more old school, I guess. But I think it's moving more and more people have issues. Like, this year is the biggest number of issues I've had, learning issues, students with learning problems, learning disabilities, learning whatever it may be, that I've had to, like, give extra time, give this, give that, you know, like, I've basically built it into my lessons now that it's just done for everybody now, because I have so many who need special adaptations. So it's too much of a pain to make, oh, this photocopy is for this person and this photocopy is for that person, you know. So I just make the adaptations and everybody benefits from it then, basically.